what happens in California can have an impact across the country.
I 100% agree. And this is why you guys have to know about this. Hey there and welcome back. And if you are new here, welcome. My name is Paola of paolaponcenails.com, your source for all things premium soft gels and entrepreneurship in the nail industry. If this sounds like a niche you'd like to continue growing in, then at the end of this video, do consider subscribing to this channel and our weekly newsletter. Let's begin. Our industry can be a fun one. Fun nail hauls, flashy nail sets, a nice, good inspirational scroll on the gram. But another fun thing about doing nails is our ability to be in business for ourselves, choosing what products we want to work with, what services we want to offer, and setting our own prices as we see fit. In the States, if you want to go into business as a nail tech, at the top of the list of items you'll need to legitimately open up for business are a manicurist license and then choosing your business model, i.e. employee, booth renter, or salon owner, so that you can then decide what further requirements you'll need to operate. In the beginning, many techs choose to become employees or booth renters, but one of these very popular options may be going away at the end of this year, and that is booth renting. A booth renter, if you're not familiar with this business model in the industry, allows licensed beauticians to rent space under one licensed establishment and individually operate as their own boss/business. Hairdressers rent a chair, nail techs typically rent an open section, and estheticians often rent a room. My purpose with today's interview is to shed light to this topic. I don't live in California, but I still care for my fellow nail tech in any state. But I am a former booth renter in California, and I want to do my part to bring our industry just a tad closer to helping one another. Today I'm sitting down with Jamie Schrader of Precision Nails in Carmel, California. If you don't know Jamie, that's because respectfully, you're living and dying on social media. Jamie is a nail tech, salon owner, educator, expert witness, and advocate for the industry. And she actually holds a PhD. I'll let her tell you in what area. I met Jamie back in 2015 or 16 at a trade show in Long Beach, California, when I had the opportunity to sit in one of her classes and even be a model for her waterless pedicure demonstration. Being in the front lines as an advocate for our industry for well over a decade, she has a wealth of knowledge to share with us. So make sure to listen to the entire interview for context and to know what is your role in this ordeal. You'll also learn where you can find Jamie next and connect with her. You'll want to. Without further ado, here's my sit down with our guest, Jamie Schrader of Precision Nails. All right, Jamie, welcome to the show. I'm happy to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. If there was one person that could answer or help me with this, it was you. So I am so glad that we were able to make this happen. I want to give our audience a little bit of context about what you do now and how in the world did you end up with a PhD in nails?
Well, my PhD is in education. I went to beauty school, it seems like a lifetime ago. It was over 30 years ago, between getting a bachelor's degree and then going back to graduate school. I actually intended to be an educator, and my area of expertise was in comprehension, reading, literacy. And what better way to pay for beauty school and also my graduate school than to rely on the resources I had available to me. So it just so happened that the ROP program, which was vocational education funding available through the federal government, paid for my beauty school experience, which was over the course of a summer. So that was 350 hours at the time in the state of California to become a licensed manicurist. So I got that paid for. And then after receiving my license, when I went back to graduate school, I was able to pay for graduate school with taking very minimal student loans by doing nails. And now I use that training to teach at beauty shows. And it's really expanded my business beyond working on clients, which I still do Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays.
That's how I met you. I met you through a trade show and I took one of your classes. It was the waterless pedicure class. And to the day, that class has been like instrumental in like my way of thinking and just simplifying things. What? No water pedicures? Like everyone does water pedicures. That was another thing I learned in your class. Your busiest day is the day you show up to work. And I was like, that's my girl. That's my girl.
You have the clients to fit into your schedule and you make yourself available when you want to work. And if you don't want to work on particular days, then don't open up your book.
Please tell us about precision nails.
Going back to the very beginning of my business, the first 5 years I owned my business, I was a booth renter. And I always made to be sure to be the only nail person in a salon of very capable hairstylists because I knew that their business would attract customers and those customers could become my clients because while there might be 10 of them, there's only one of me in that salon. So that always worked out well. At the very beginning, I did go out on my own, and this was back a long time ago. So like 1997, I believe I was 8 months pregnant at the time with my child. And I was on ladders painting 10-foot high ceilings and that sort of things I should not have been doing when I was that pregnant. But when you're so excited to start a new business on your own with my own establishment license and working alone, I was thrilled. And so it started that way. And I worked that way for quite some time and then eventually moved locations and expanded to hire employees. And I had employees for the next 17 years of my career. And then more recently, I am back to being a solo person again. And will probably finish out my career that way, not because I don't enjoy the company of other people or having extra clients around when you have staff to work with you. It's that it becomes more complicated. And anyone who's contemplated working with someone else realizes very quickly all of the financial and legal obligations that come with having employees. And this is why we're in this situation we're in now.
Yes, yes. And when I started, I did the scary thing of like starting as a booth renter. And I think this is also why we are here. We both have experience as booth renters and we realized like, wow, this is such a really simplistic model to operate. And it really allows us to focus on what we're in nails to begin with, right? We're not in nails to be bosses of other people, you know what I mean? Or to be like these CEOs and managing people and telling them what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And like, then it just creates more work as an employer if you're not ready to get there or delegate that boss role. For me, booth renting was my saving grace. It allowed me to start small and take that big step, but like in a little way, right? Without like committing to all of the things as an independent nail tech. So again, this is why we're here. So you are an advocate and expert witness on behalf of the industry. And I just want to know, what does that type of work look like?
Well, if you get involved, as I did very early on, with how our industry is governed, you start learning very quickly what you know and what you don't know. So I have a lot of intellectual curiosity around how we're regulated. And so I always want to be aware. I always want to have the right information. And if I don't know it, I want to know where to get it. I wanted to apply the same sort of academic rigor to this industry that I did to the subjects of my study when I was in graduate school. I realized that where I was supposed to be getting this information, which was the beauty school experience, where you are obligated to be there for so many hours. You have a textbook, you have instructors. They're supposed to be preparing you for a test and then to actually succeed in the industry. And to realize that so much of what I was being presented with was either inaccurate or incomplete, I just thought, this is a complete waste of my time. And where do I go to get the correct information? Well, we have to go to the source. You always have to go to the source. And in this case, that was our state board. And then, of course, the state board only functions and only has its authority because the state legislature has granted that authority for the state board to function. And that's true in every state. The state board is not a professional organization. It's not there to support beauty professionals. It's tasked with protecting the consumers of that state. And that legislature is acknowledging that they don't have the expertise. So they delegate that to the state board. And from there, the state board relies on people from within the industry. And those people can be cosmetic chemists, they can be salon owners, they can be individual licensees in each of the different license types. Those are the experts. So every state board relies on experts. What I do for our state board is I review cases that they assign me where someone has been injured or claims to have been injured in a situation where nail services happen. So I don't do any expert witness work around hair care or skin care or barbering because that's not my expertise. But
Right.
ask me a question about whether or not this pedicure was performed the correct way, what the tools were, whether those were tools that we should be using or not using, was the cleaning done properly? All of those things related to negligence and competence, I can address those based on my expertise, not only as someone who does the work, but someone who knows the rules.
Is there more like you? Are there more manicures expert witness out there?
Yes, I'm not the only one, but I would like to think that over the course of the number of years I've been doing this, I believe I've been doing this since 2008. So it's not a regular thing where I can say, I'm going to get X number of cases each year, because the whole process is one by which a consumer has to first complain. And if consumers don't complain directly to the state board, then it doesn't become a case.
Now, is that something that you get compensated yourself, or do you have to volunteer?
You get compensated when you are assigned a case, but there is an hour limit, and I routinely go over the hour limit, which means I'm not getting paid any extra
The
for
nerd
that.
in
And
you, right?
it's the nerd in me. And it's not anything like what you would get paid when I do work for private cases, where either a plaintiff's attorney or a defending salon or an attorney defending a salon would contact me. There you're getting like more regular rates that make sense.
Now we're here because booth renting could soon become illegal in California. Is that correct? Am I saying that correctly?
It would be specific to manicurists.
Okay.
And so that has evolved over time because we've just assumed, at least for the length of my career, which has been more than 30 years, that once we enter the industry, that we have options for how we work. We can either try to get a job at a salon by applying to become an employee, or we could find a space that may be available at a salon and apply to rent that space, or we could try to, in essence, get our own establishment licenses and work for ourselves in a completely separate location where the entire thing is our responsibility, where we hold both the establishment license and, of course, the individual license, which allows us to do the services themselves.
We were supposed to lose the right to be booth renters, correct? Back in 2018, is that correct?
In 2018, there was a court case that was decided by the Supreme Court of California. So just to clarify that this case applied to California. And this case had to deal with, I believe it was delivery drivers, but the case is either referred to as Dynamics or Dynamex, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But it completely flipped on its head the way that the state would determine who was an employee and who was an independent contractor. So before this case happened, it was the burden of the person who was claiming that they should have been treated as an employee to prove, hey, I was an employee because of all these different things that I was being asked to do or compelled to do.
Okay.
So it was, the burden of proof was on the worker. Now this case said, we are going to assume you're an employee unless the business can prove that you were independent.
Basically, it went from that court ruling in 2018, Dynamax versus the Supreme Court of California. Is that correct?
That is the Supreme, yeah, that's the Supreme Court of California's decision. And
Okay.
once that happened, then because labor law and employment law is so complicated because it involves, there are so many different agencies that are involved. There's workers' compensation.
Okay.
There's unemployment insurance. There's like the wage and hour issues. Our state has paid sick leave, family leave. I mean, there are so many different laws
Wow.
and rules, and there is no one agency that oversees everything. These are
Mm.
happening in different agencies. Even though you operate this business and you think, okay, I need to get my license, I need to do this, I need to do that. When it comes to compliance, you are actually having to comply with laws that are being enforced and regulated by a variety of agencies at both the state level and the federal level. But California being California, we tend to be stricter and more pro worker than most.
Mhm.
So our state laws are going to be even more demanding of business owners than other states may be. So it's really our state laws where we need to focus
Okay.
this whole effort, and that we are the largest state in the union and we have the largest population of licensees and beauty businesses. What happens in California can have an impact across the country.
I 100% agree. And this is why you guys have to know about this because you might be saying, well, I'm no longer at the beginner stage. Like, that's for beginners. Booth Warrington's for beginners. No, it's not. It's very much also for the part-time person who wants to be like their own boss. It's also for the person who, so if your responsibilities increase, let's just say like at home or whatever, you might not be able to manage that suite or that salon anymore. And you have to have this option that still allows you to work for yourself and have that freedom, enjoy that freedom at a much lower burden. And then also, I know that nail techs, as they're getting ready to retire, they do like to cut the responsibilities in half at least. And booth renting is again that option that allows them to do that. So it's a big, big deal. I want to ask you, what has been your involvement since that went into place? Because other than being an expert witness, I believe you also lobby for this industry, right? And is that something formal or is that a hobby thing that anyone can pick up?
It's an expensive hobby. I am not a registered lobbyist. I don't get paid to do this. I am, again, going back to that whole concept of intellectual curiosity. I've been attending our state board meetings for almost 20 years
Wow.
now, and I will drive to them, I will fly to them, I will get to them. Uh, any way
Expensive
I
hobby
can.
for sure.
It's a very expensive hobby, but how else to know what's happening? And the natural extension from that is that when there are laws being proposed in our state legislature that impact us, I have to now go to Sacramento and go to hearings and write emails and get people on the phone to say, hey, this law is a great idea, I support it, or hey, this law is crazy, this would have a horrible impact on our industry. And I do that because, again, we are not passive in all of this. We have a role to play, and this directly impacts our ability to earn a living and it impacts our quality of life. And to pick up the story, so once that Supreme Court decision was announced, you can imagine, because it impacted all industries, not just the industry where the lawsuit was taking place. It impacted all industries. So you have real estate agents screaming, you've got doctors, you can imagine everyone saying, I don't want to be an employee. Our These companies don't want to pay us as employees. We want to be independent where it's appropriate. And one of the first things they said was, we're professionally licensed. We're not like the rest of those workers, whatever workers you're talking about. That's not us. We have this training and we're qualified. And so we deserve to have that kind of independence and choose where we work and how we work. And I want to just say this right now. When I use the term worker, I don't want anyone in our industry to be offended because we have gone to school, we have passed an exam, we do have a license. But the term worker really defines your relationship to whoever owns the business. It has nothing to do with what your training is. It is all about what your relationship is to the owner of the business. So, for example, in my business, I was up until recently an employer, but
Mhm.
I was also providing services alongside my employees, but I was an employer. And workers come from all different kinds of backgrounds. And so I just use that term very loosely to describe everyone who'd be in a position where they are being employed by a business owner. And that business could be a real estate agency, it could be a hospital, it could be so many different things. that those different constituencies who have very powerful lobbies, you could imagine,
Yeah.
like a medical
Sure. Yeah.
association or the real estate agents or lawyers, right? Lawyers, um, all these people who'd want to claim, hey, we don't want to be forced into this arrangement without some exemption. And that's where this term exemption comes up. And there
Mhm.
was a bill introduced called AB5, and this bill was worked on all throughout 2019. And that was the year where the advocacy really ramped up, where all of these different industries were lobbying the legislature to exempt their industry from the ruling that happened in the Supreme Court decision. And so when you hear the word exemption over and over again, that's what you needed to have, is you needed to have an exemption to allow for people to actually work as independent contractors.
So we went court case. Now we're at Assembly Bill 5 in 2019.
2019, and originally it did nothing for us because the original
Of
text
course.
of the bill didn't include us.
And so then you have groups of people in their industry, particular industry, lobbying and getting on the phone with people and saying, okay, we want to be part of this exemption, right? And so you
So
started lobbying for us at this point, right?
So a bill evolves. When a bill first gets introduced, it's introduced by a particular author, whether it's introduced in the Assembly or in the Senate, and then it gives the those of us who'd be impacted the opportunity to reach out to that particular legislator and rally our colleagues to also reach out. As soon as we saw what was happening, and that, not surprisingly, because there is a hierarchy in the beauty industry, that people who do hair were able to get themselves included in an exemption on one of the, because mind you, bills get revised all the time and they get updated. And you can always go back and look at the history of a bill and see the different revisions date by date as a bill moves through the entire process. So when we saw that there was an opening, but who walked through the opening? Hair people. And when I say hair people, it doesn't really make any sense because in California, we have that master license of cosmetology
Mm-hmm.
that's hair, skin, and nails. And then you have barbering, which is hair. It's not skincare, it's
Mm-hmm.
not nails. And we thought, well, wait a second, you can't just say people who do hair because that's not really a thing. You're going to have to tie that back to an actual license type so you can
Mm-hmm.
designate who is exempt. Well, if we're going to talk about beauty licensees, then we need to name them. And in fact, there are 5 different types of beauty licensees. We have cosmetologists, we have barbers, we have estheticians, we have electrologists, and we have manicurists.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to extend it to one, we need to extend it to all. And that's where a colleague of mine, Wendy Cochran, who's a licensed esthetician, and I really hammered on this point that all of us, every C, which is our abbreviation for our board, every BBC licensee deserves to have the same fair treatment under the law and have this same opportunity to be exempt from
Mm-hmm.
AB5. And we always knew there would be conditions. And in fact, I do believe that the Nail Pro article included the conditions by which we can operate as independent contractors. And you'll see in there that one of those conditions was that we should issue a 1099. In fact, it was already required, but now it makes it very clear that if we are in fact renting space from a salon owner, that it's on us to issue a 1099 to that salon owner to put the IRS on notice that that business owner received that rent over the course of the year and that we're going to claim it on our taxes. For salon owners, it allows them to build out a space, buy some equipment, and then just rent either a chair or a room or whatever it is. An establishment license covers the entire space, the entire salon.
And you can see how someone in the beauty industry or any profession says, hold on a second, I didn't go to school, whether it was like a 4-year university or a 400-hour course, to become that person that is reporting to all of these different agencies. And this is why booth renting becomes really a thing, right? It becomes really popular because it's just, again, that low overhead and allows ourselves to govern ourselves, right? So then the exemption happens, right? We get a green, right? Kind of, sort of.
By the skin of our teeth. I mean, it was when you look at because the legislative session has these deadlines, and if a bill doesn't make it through committee or it doesn't get approved at different points along the way, then it just dies. So it was very touch and go. And I know that there was pressure on myself and Wendy to just, step aside and let the hair people get theirs and don't screw it up for them, which I thought was one of the most insulting things I've ever been told. But that's okay. We kept pushing and we kept making our case that it has to apply to everyone. And in fact, it did. But where there was the snag, and this is now haunting us, is that the perception of manicurists in the state of California is that we are exploited, that we are easily stereotyped as being unable to either fend for ourselves or fund ourselves or operate a business for ourselves or whatever it is. It's very patronizing, actually, and condescending, but that there was so much concern about exploitation of nail salon workers that there was, in effect, a deadline, what's called an inoperative date. So yes, we got the green light for the exemption in AB5, but manicurists were told within the bill that we're only going to get this exemption for a limited amount of time. I am not discounting the fact that our industry has a huge problem, but when I say our industry, I mean the beauty industry and not just nail professionals. I think it's easy for people to point to nail professionals because across the board, we tend to charge less for services. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't look as empowered because so much of what's being done is competing on price. Mm-hmm. And maybe people expect more of hair professionals and skincare professionals. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but what little agency we have, and you and I both had it as booth renters, right? We could choose where we wanted to rent. We could choose our hours. We could choose the products we work with.
Very
and
important.
Here's another concern, because this always is something that comes up, is that along with being worried about us being exploited, there's always the concern that we're working with super dangerous chemicals. Yes. And I know that I am not a chemical expert. I mean, that's why we have cosmetic chemists in our industry to explain product chemistry and how to use things properly to protect ourselves and not get overexposed to anything. But if you work for a salon owner, you don't have power over what they purchase for you at all. So that was something that I did not argue about. Although at one point we were thinking that one of the conditions that should have been included in AB5 was the condition that in order to be considered a true independent contractor, that you would actually supply your own products. Mm. But when the final bill came out, that wasn't there. So that was a discussion, but that wasn't something that was written in to the final law.
Why do you think there's a deadline there?
And I'm hoping that whole argument around equity, that each license type be treated fairly, did carry some weight. We don't know exactly what persuaded them, but I'm hoping that did. But it allowed the legislature to kick the can down the road to say, oh, we'll pick this up later.
Right.
Well, one of the ways they could have picked it up later was to improve the process around enforcing the labor and employment laws, right? If we're so concerned about workers in the nail salon industry, then let's give some resources to the labor commissioner. Let's do outreach to nail salon owners and nail salon workers so that they have the right information. They know their rights and the owners know their responsibilities. But we didn't see any of that because, again, for the most part, and this will come as no surprise to anyone, as an industry, we're just not that important.
Court case, then we had AB5, and then because of some lobbying through you and Miss Wendy, I forgot her last name, we were able to get some guidelines as to, okay, you beauticians are allowed to continue booth renting, except for the manicurists Your exemption ends in January of 2022, I think January 1st of 2022.
That was the original date in the AB5 bill. And then there was a second bill that came along that kicked the can down the road again for manicurists because they realized, hey, we haven't had a chance to address this yet. And so we won an extension of that exemption. It's that exemption that's ending at the end of this year.
Okay, so we're going to refer to it as the exemption, just because, again,
Yes.
you mentioned the numbers get recycled. AB5 in 2019 is something different than it was in 2020 and 2021 and so on and so forth.
Again, because people aren't paying any attention that this is looming over us. No one even paid attention to that bill either. It wasn't like the whole industry was breathing a sigh of relief. Oh, look, we get to keep booth renting. It's like they may not have realized there was ever any threat to the opportunity to booth rent.
And I'm glad that you also mentioned that we're just not as organized. And unfortunately, it's just like hard to blame, especially within the last few years. It's just social media. People have gone in the mindset that their business does not exist outside of social media. If they're not on social media, there is no way they can possibly have a viable business, which is so not true. But that's where we're at. Like, we don't have an industry if we don't have social media. And that is not true because a lot of people don't even know how to have a nail business in California or elsewhere. In the US, there are two ways to get a license. Again, you have to get a license in the US, basically, right?
If you want to go for that license, then you're going to sign up for a course that earns you the hours that are required to take the exam. And that exam is something that gets scheduled after you've completed your course successfully.
You have to go test with your state board, pass your test. There's no longer a practical in California, which is fine, honestly, because when I was at my practical, like, no one was looking and I had to put an acrylic nail and like, okay, that doesn't save lives, but like, here we are, we did the acrylic nail. Okay, so you fulfill that requirement, you get your nail license, and then you have to decide, how am I going to work? How am I going to work in the state of California? So then you're like, wait, am I going to be an employee? Do I have to be employed? Do I work for myself? Or am I like going to open a nail business? Or am I going to be mobile? Or am I going to be home based? Right? Let's talk about the three most popular. That would be, I guess, employee, right? Most newbie nail techs are going to feel like they don't have it all figured out to go on their own. So they're probably going to try to look for a place of employment. After that, there's booth renting. I think that's probably the most popular model, right? And then there is salon ownership, which can be as minimal as just yourself with your establishment license, correct?
Correct. And to take a step back from that, if you just wanted to open up a business, you don't take any schooling. In other words, establishment owners don't have to have any training or experience in the industry in order to apply for an establishment license and open a business. It's just that they can't allow anyone to work in that business providing services who don't hold the individual licenses.
I don't really want to talk about home based necessarily because that's all like county based. So you have to check with your local jurisdiction, whether that's like your town, your city, or your county, if they allow home based service. Some do, most don't, because it would just change the flow of the community, whether that's like increased traffic, whether because of clients or inventory or whatever it may be. Instead of three very popular models, we're just going to have two, right? We're going to have the employee and the person that owns a nail salon. So we want to be clear. This does not affect suites.
I'm glad you are making a distinction between suite ownership and that sort of thing, because before suites came along, it was always pretty obvious those different paths that you could take. And really, suite ownership is no different from salon ownership. It just happens to be maybe in a building that's built out where every single individual space in that building is a beauty business, but it's no different from when those of us who decided to go to a landlord who might have had a building with various different types of businesses in it and said, hey, behind this door, you've got plumbing, you've got everything I need to operate a salon. Rent this to me and I will get my establishment license and I will operate my beauty business within your larger commercial building.
So in essence, if a nail tech is no longer allowed to booth rent, then her options become to become an employee or to take on a lease of some sort.
But a lease where you are responsible for now the electric bill, the water bill, the sewage bill. I mean, it just goes on and on. There's so much more responsibility because you are now the person who has that relationship with all of those different service providers that contribute to the operation of your space. Whereas before, it was just like a package deal where you would just pay the salon owner. It's like, yeah, this is my little space and, give me a key.
So this goes back to how this would impact livelihoods and people that are going to have to make a big decision coming up because this is going away or could be going away. Does this affect people that are subleasing? So maybe they go into a suite and then they're like, well, I want to share my little space, my already little space with someone else. Does this affect them?
It would, because you would not be able to then lease to manicurists. You would have to lease to the other license types that are allowed to booth rent.
Is the suite owner affected just if they take out this, if they lease the suite and then they have their own establishment license? That's not booth renting anymore, correct? I just want to make that distinction.
Right. When you have an establishment license, you are no longer a booth renter. You are a salon owner.
And that's the factor for differentiating the two.
Correct. Because a salon owner can either work by themselves, they can, and in fact, many people do. I mean, that's essentially the suite model is you are a salon owner, you have an establishment license. And if you decide to work alone the entire time, that's fine. If you decide to take on a partner, I mean, that gets a little complicated with taxes and like whose name is actually going on the establishment license.
What if both of them are on the lease? Does that make any difference?
It's not even who's on the lease because it's whose name is on the establishment license.
Because there can be two people on the establishment.
There could be multiple people on an establishment license. It can be a corporation, it could be an LLC, it could be a partnership, it could be a sole proprietor. So that's going to be determining, whose name is on that establishment license is how you apply for it. And mind you, again, there are no requirements. There's no course you take or test you pass to say, hey, I know what it's like to operate a beauty business. I know what my obligations are. I know what I have to do and who I have to report to and what I have to pay. A lot of people don't have the credit to qualify to even get the lease because you have to go beyond just, thinking about, okay, I've got to spend money on my products and my tools and my furnishings. You've got to have good credit in order to pay first and last. You might have to build out the space. It might need new flooring, new lighting, new plumbing. I mean, there could be a lot of things that add up very quickly that if you don't have good credit, are you just going to fund that entire thing on your credit cards? Obviously, you tried to look for a space that had as much of the things that you're going to need in order to check those boxes on that application. And you're signing a lease agreement, and it's going to be a multi-page document that you need to take to your lawyer in order to make sure that you understand what you're obligating yourself to.
This is not going to be enticing. This is going to be like, you know what? Maybe I should keep my current career. Maybe I shouldn't quit my job. Maybe I shouldn't pursue my dream of, people do dream about being manicurists. Now they're going to have to dream really big. They're going to be like, ooh, signage, ooh, flooring, ooh, sing. So again, it's taking that low risk component of getting into nails and just focusing on the art of itself. Because even if we're doing basic services, I mean, architecture and nails, that's art in itself, And, when you lose booth renting, now you have to commit yourself to salon ownership. And if that rent is too much for you, then you have to get in a partnership in a way to sublease together, to get that establishment together, establishment license together. So things start getting a little bit more you start taking on more risk and responsibility than you initially wanted to. And then again, maybe if that suite eventually gets too much for you, then you don't have the safety net of booth renting and going to just space renting, because again, that may be going away. One thing that I forgot to mention was that when I was pointing out the most popular three that it could affect, we're not talking about, and this is like also dear to me, we're not talking about like the entrepreneurial nail tech who already operates a salon with the 1099 model, with the independent contractor, the renter model. So what I'm saying, it's like, I could say, you know what, I'm paying a lot of rent for this studio space, this building space or whatnot. What if I move into a bigger place that allows me to have multiple nail tables and rent those tables out to nail techs and potentially even also make the rent more affordable? So rather than paying $1,200 plus for a nail suite, they're paying me a renter fee of $400 to $600 to rent the space a month.
You're right. Anyone who has that business model would be impacted by a change in the law. They would have to either convert those people to employees, which obviously that's not what they wanted to begin with, or they would have been employees the entire time.
I at least know one person that runs this business model of being a salon owner and renting space just for manicures, which I think it's great because, like you said, a lot of the times the beauty suites aren't built out with nail techs in mind. And in fact, I think that the rent that they charge is proof of that, because for guys like me personally, if I have to pay anywhere from 12 to 1600, at least back in my day, which was not that long ago, I really questioned that. I was like, ooh, you know, my current rent is only $400 a month. This would not only affect the newbie nail tech, right? Who is just starting their business. It will also affect those entrepreneurial nail techs who are willing to take on more responsibility to even make things more affordable for their fellow nail techs. So again, that would be gone. So
here's the workaround though. Licensed manicurists are the ones being targeted, but we know that cosmetologists have the right to do nails. So you could replace all of your licensed manicurists with licensed cosmetologists who do nails. See how that's not fair? So if you went to school longer, like you sucked it up and did all of those hours so that you could be a licensed cosmetologist, it's not targeting nails per se, it's targeting manicurists. It's targeting the actual license type.
The license type.
So the license type.
Now my nail techs, in order to be able to booth renters, have to be cosmetologists.
So
this is a workaround. So if anyone's interested, and if you just want to pay money up front for pointing that out, I guess.
It's not a solution though. No, if we wanted to do hair, we would have done the cosmetology license.
January 1st, 2025 comes into effect.
The exemption goes away. And I think,
do we have like prosecutors at the door of every booth rental? Like,
I don't know how that's going to get enforced, or how salons would get reported for doing it the wrong way. Licensed manicurists aren't going to turn themselves in. I don't understand. If we had a problem with reporting legitimate of exploitation and wage theft, if that wasn't being taken care of, I don't even know what this looks like.
If this is going to affect, then nail techs that own, well, they own their business and they have the establishment license renting out to nail techs, they also should start dissolving their business right about now, because they're not sure what's going to happen in 2025, or they should start explaining to their renters that, hey, come 2025, January 1st, go get a cosmetology license. Like what, like, you know what I mean? Like no one on the other side, the enforcement side, is saying like, hey, by the way, hurry up, dissolve these businesses because we don't have plans for an extension. Now, it is my understanding after reading the original article was that there have been attempts, right, to have an extension, but that they've been turned down.
Yes. Over the course of the years that have happened since AB5 went into effect, there have been a number of bills that would have gotten rid of the inoperative date, that would have made us like all the other license types. So we wouldn't have to worry about this. But those bills have not made it through. And that's sad that, and again, I think if people were more aware of the looming danger, they could have gotten involved and advocated for, yes, let's get rid of this inoperative date. Let's make sure that we're able to work this way forever and ever.
Yeah.
And that just didn't happen. Obviously, it didn't happen. And again, it's a matter of getting people's attention. And if the solution, or if the legislature and lawmakers think the solution is, well, those salons can just convert those workers to, or those people working in the salons, and we'll give them that, to employees, like make them legitimate employees. That's just not going to happen. Or if it does happen, it's not going to happen well. And we're going to end up with more exploitation, because there's this idea that somehow there's all this gray area in the law. There's not. There's people try to make space. They try to muddy the waters and create uncertainties, but it's pretty cut and dry.
It's actually, manicuring is a wear and tear on your body, but like that is why people decide how much they want to work, how much they're going to charge, because they don't want exploitation, because they don't want to be forced to work with these products and giving these services that they're not passionate about. This is nail tech. Very few times it's a job. It really is a career. Like I said it myself, I was like, I'm going to make it work for myself as an independent, or I'm going back to serving, because that was really fun. That was really easy. It kept my mind, going. And that's initially why I got into it. I just wanted pretty nails when I was serving tables. But then I was like, kind of got a little addicted. Some people know that story. And I was like, no, I'm doing this. This is really fun. And again, the idea of like, oh, I can govern myself. I don't have to take on this much overhead.
Getting back to the original intent of the court decision, which was to, again, shift the burden onto employers to prove that their workers were in fact independent and not to be treated as employees. None of this solves that problem of exploitation. In fact, it would force more people to be exposed to that possibility when you take away options. And if I thought that forcing people into just two options, you either work for someone else or you work for yourself and you work alone, if I thought that was the answer, then I would have been saying from the very beginning, please don't include us. Do not exempt us. Don't exempt anybody. The whole industry has an issue with misclassification and with exploitation, wage theft, tip theft. We can go through all the different things that go into that, or being exposed to chemicals that they shouldn't be exposed to, not being provided the proper protective equipment, or even given the time to wash your hands, clean the tools, all of these things that go into operating a business legitimately. If I thought taking away our choices would solve this problem, and that then the resources could be focused on, let's elevate the compliant salons, let's enforce the laws against those businesses that aren't compliant, I'd be happy for that, because then there would be this distinction and it would become very obvious, I would hope, to not only licensees and salon owners to do the right thing, but also to consumers who are these clients who are paying money, and in some cases paying money to support exploitation. I mean, I thought that would be helpful. I'd say, by all means, let's just make it very cut and dry. That's the case in some states where booth rental is not allowed.
That's right, because
for anybody, right? But does that keep people from being exploited? No, because people are always looking to either take shortcuts or to make things easier for them. They're greedy, whatever the case may be, that they find a way, because they will find people who are willing to take those positions, even when those positions are not legitimately being done.
Like you say, if this was more about like real protection for the worker, right? Then they would visit these places. They would, audit, they would enforce the laws that are there. I think if anyone that cares is listening, booth renting actually protects us. It does not, it protects those that care about abiding by the law. Those people that were never compliant, this isn't going to make them any more compliant.
And earlier when I said that we're just not that important, we're of course important to ourselves, we're important to our clients, we're important to our families, but in terms of the legislatures and the members of our state assemblies and senates, and then even going up to Congress at the federal level, we don't act collectively, we don't lobby collectively, we don't spend collectively, and we don't vote collectively. So without those things, we are just little individuals who just happen to be beauty professionals. And consumers, I do put some blame on them, because if all they're looking for is the cheapest price, they are exploiting us too.
How does this affect the consumer if we no longer have booth rental?
I'm not sure how it will. I can't say with any confidence that it's going to raise prices, lower prices. It's going to reduce the number of available businesses, although I think it likely could reduce client options.
Customers are going to have to do one of two things, and if they just say, can't afford it and I'm not going to support that, then they're going to go to the web and they're going to do it themselves or try to do it themselves. And now we have an issue of not knowing what they're doing, hurting themselves. And so now, again, it goes back to like not helping the consumer, and it's not helping that independent nail tech either. So it's affecting both sides significantly.
It's not that hard to open a salon. You apply for a license, get a lease, spend the money, go into debt, whatever it takes. But to actually operate one and operate one legitimately for the long term, that's much harder to do.
Oh,
and
yeah.
where it always breaks down is around the issue of labor. And it's not that we don't have a ton of people who have a license who could be employed. It's that the compensation being offered or the work arrangement is not either, it seems too cheap or just is not sustainable because it's not legitimate. One of the silver linings of being exempted when we were, and you look at the language of AB5, was that it really defined what it means to be independent. It focused on things like the fact that if you are an independent contractor, you are maintaining your own book of clients. You are collecting money directly from those clients. You have your own business license. These are all things that you can check off and say, this is what I need to do to be a legitimate independent contractor in the beauty industry. So for that reason alone, I thought that this exemption was so worthwhile because it eliminated all of that confusion where before there might have been all these different factors around, like, are you being told what to wear? Are you being told when to come? Do you get a key? There were, again, all these different factors that different agencies might use, whether it's the IRS or the Department of Labor or the labor commissioner in the state, to determine who is an employee, who is an independent contractor. The fact that we got this exemption and there were some very clear guidelines as to what someone needed to do to be compliant and to be able to say, and it wasn't like, oh, pick 3 of these 6 things. It's like, you have to do every one of these things in order to be considered independent, which is one of the reasons why in any salon that's not employee based, I tell the salon owner, you better not have a communal database of clients. You've got to maintain separate databases.
And is that in AB5 or AB 1561?
That's in AB5. So that's the original
Okay.
law. And the only thing that AB 1561 did for us was to postpone that inoperative date, to give us a couple more years of being able to work as independent contractors.
So when I read AB5, I was like going through the checklist and I'm like, yes, yes, yeah. And I was like, I get to number 5, like basically reading like, except for manicurists after this date. And you're just like, wait, what? I had to be like, what does that mean? Like, I literally was like, I couldn't believe that like what could have been obviously written. I was still like, it can't just single out nail techs. Like, no way. Like, what does this really mean? And then when you read and then I talk to people like you and I'm like, oh, it really does mean except for the nail tech after this date. I was just like, what? Are they serious? Okay, I guess they are. Why? I was like, isn't that called discrimination somewhere? But never mind. Like, I guess somehow,
It
some
is.
way, like
It is discriminating against this license type. And this is where I try to tie it back to the information that we don't have, but we have somewhat anecdotally because of the stereotypes of our industry. So if we want to talk about how that's going to discriminate against women, women of color, immigrant women, undocumented women, I mean, we can just run the gamut on the most vulnerable people. It's going to limit their options and not allow them to at least get a foothold in the industry as their own boss, making their own decisions as to what products they use, who they choose to work on. Again, all of those things that are part of that checklist in AB5 that qualify a business to say, yes, these are our independent contractors. They are not our employees. They are, in fact, independent because they are doing all of these things because we're following AB5, and those independent contractors we have working in our business are following AB5 as well.
it's not right. It's not right. And I am an immigrant myself. And like, yes, our industry tends to attract immigrants. Why? Because they're typically hardworking and they don't mind the hard work, even for, I don't want to say whatever pay, but like they're willing to put in the hard work and worry about the money later in some regard, right? But this just complicates so much for them, just when they thought they could have their own business. And like you said, it's that entire list, and there is more that it targets, not directly, but indirectly. And when it ends, it will be directly, I guess, but yeah. Okay, so I want to read to you a couple of the comments that I've been reading about while this has been on social. We want to listen to both sides. I did not get anyone that was like, yeah, like, let's go. Like, we've been waiting for something like this to protect us or to help us or to, like, no, like, all of the comments were, this is outrageous, very unfortunate, this is horrible, confused, on the excuse for classification. Like, someone also says, yeah, I guess if they can't enforce the current rules, what makes them think they can and will enforce the new ones? It goes back to what we've been saying throughout this whole interview. So this is the one that I wanted to share with you. The question from this community member, she says, I'd also like state board gone. She says, she's like, on top of this, I also like state board gone. And I thought, like, just going to use Mandy as code name here. I was like, what? You're crazy. Like, are you serious? Wouldn't it be like the Wild Wild West? But then she presented a point following this. And I was like, oh, interesting. Actually, I might side for a moment there with you. It says, have techs, so have manicurists go to school, get a diploma, but have to register with a local county health department. Tattoo artists do this. Then you take a $35 90-minute sanitation disinfection test yearly. So what do you think about tattoo artists not having a license, yet they can penetrate skin and all of that? And we are being regulated by the state board.
Do we have an industry if we don't have licenses? Licensure gives us a standard, and it's a minimum standard. But essentially, it's that when we get our license, we are
like a moral agreement.
Yes. So tattooing is a completely different profession. It is regulated county by county. And if we have no state board, there's no health and safety regulations. So we almost faced this during the same bill that got rid of our practical exam and helped lower the barrier to entry to beauty school to 1,000-hour minimum for barbering and cosmetology in the state of California.
Oh.
And had that bill not passed, that was a sunset bill. Had that bill not passed, we would have eliminated the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology altogether. And there would be no licensing. There would be no rules, none. And you talk about the Wild West, it would be beyond Wild West. Anyone could do anything, anywhere, except by virtue of what was banned by local jurisdictions. You can't entrust that process, something that important, like health and safety, to something that could be that easily corrupted.
Ultimately, what do you think should be done? Like, what is your opinion of what should happen before the expiration of the exemption?
It would be ideal if either one of these committees, whose responsibility is to look at labor law, if they were to develop their own bill proposing that this exemption be permanently granted. That's what I want, is a permanent exemption, just like all the other license types have a permanent exemption. And then let's pivot to tackling the actual problem, which is exploitation, which happens to every different license type. It's not just happening in nail salons, it happens in spas. It happens in high-end businesses, not just cheap businesses.
This is very important now. This is where we all really need to just pay attention. And Jamie, you being in this field of lobbying and expert witness and somewhat familiar with the courts, what is our role? What do we need to do after this interview? And I mean, like, literally take 5 minutes of your time to advocate for yourself, advocate for a family member, advocate for whoever you're allowed to advocate. And that is my other question. So not only what can we do, but also who can advocate? Can someone that is out of the state, can they advocate for Californians? No?
Anyone can write to any.
So there you go. All of you are officially invited.
Yeah, your clients can write. I mean, if you were a booth renter and this is going to impact you, I'd have all of your clients writing.
Amazing. There you go.
And spreading the word about this, because you would want them to know that you're supporting this business, you're supporting this person who's pursuing their dream career, getting back to that whole idea of their dream career, and that you want them to be able to continue their business. Mm-hmm. So that's something where it's not just us. We can always enlist friends, family, clients, other businesses. Yeah, absolutely. I would want everyone to be willing to advocate for us, because certainly I've been in that position where I've advocated for my colleagues who operate in other states. We're trying to protect our industry. So if you think of it that way, and you think of ourselves as a collective group, and while this may not impact you directly, like you may not have to make any decisions in the next couple of months yourself because you're not operating in California, I would want you to feel empowered to do some of the things that you already do. You already share stories on Instagram. You already post on Facebook, or anywhere that you interact with others in our industry and with your clients. Just by sharing this, that is a huge way to advocate. It's like one of the easiest things you can do. And you want to write a quick little note and say, this is who I am. I'm a member of the beauty industry. I'm also a licensed nail professional. And while I don't work in the state of California, if this is the case, you can say that manicurists deserve the same rights as every other beauty licensee. That's a message that could get across to anyone. And we should be willing to stand up when things are just not right, when it doesn't seem right, whether it impacts us directly or not. That's part of being in an industry. The fact that we can get together and think beyond ourselves to other people who are more vulnerable, to other people for whom this would be a huge economic impact, and more important, to those people who this would directly affect. You have every right to defend your ability to make a living. Any communications, we need to come from a place of respect so that people feel good working with us as opposed to working against us. So I shouldn't have to say this, but
mind your tone, guys.
yes,
Mind your
no
tone.
matter how high the emotions run, please, don't go over the top. No threats, please.
No threats, please. Yes.
It's not important to say things that would get you in trouble. In fact, that would be a very foolish thing to do, to put things like that. The sort of thing that you wouldn't mind being publicized. And by all means, vote, because none of this would be happening to us if we had people in positions of power who understood us.
To add to our template, our verbal template of what we want in that letter is, what we want is a permanent exemption.
Yes.
The person submits their name, their association to this career or this booth rental situation, and then they express how they would be affected and then what they want. So what they want is
a permanent exemption from AB5, just like all other license types have in California.
All right. So Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today. I mean, you've been so wonderful and instrumental in all of this, actually, because the reason why we have an exemption is because you lobbied for us and you got us that exemption, even though it was temporary. So now it's sort of like on our court, right? Like ball on our court for us to help you and help us, really, right? We're not really helping you. You've got the salon ownership. Make a change and make this a permanent change in the law. And where can people find your work and where they can continue to follow your work, grow with you, take your classes, all of that?
The easiest place to follow what I'm doing is at my website, which is precisionnails.com. I do some social media, but I am one of those people who likes to live in real time, in real life, more often than not. So I will encourage you all to go to beauty shows, to interact in person as much as you possibly can, and to pick up the phone or to text. I have my contact information on the website, and I will definitely respond to you if there's something happening in your state that you feel is not fair or would limit your ability to earn a living. I want to hear about it, because then we can come to your rescue and help support you wherever you are. That's what being in an industry means, is that we've all collectively have committed to this as a career. We just aren't taking it to the next level with protecting our career and protecting what we've invested in so far.
Thank you all so much for joining us in this interview. Do your part, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you, Jamie, for joining us.
Thank you.
And there you have it, the full story and what you can do to protect manicurists' rights to continue operating as booth renters now in California, but who knows, maybe elsewhere. I hope today's interview inspires you to protect and get closer to our industry. I'll link you down below to the resources mentioned in this video and the information for you to write in and advocate if this interview has compelled you to do so. Feel free to drop any questions down below in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.